This is a painting of Shugborough and its park from the east, which is where Great Haywood is from. And as you can see, this some people have argued that it's an inspiration for Middle Earth. I should add that some people suspect that Dudley is the inspiration for Mordor, but that's just probably a vile accusation. I'm going to talk tonight about the Ghosts of Goblin Hill. For those of you who might have been at Weird Weekend North 2025 a couple of weeks ago, my apologies, because this is the same talk, but without chocolate bars, I will stress. And but a good while ago, when Caroline kindly invited me to give a talk, I thought, what should I talk about? Oh, I know. I'm preparing for the Weird Weekend. I may as well repeat that. And I had arranged with David Sutton for my article, which relates to it, to be published in the issue of Fortean Times, which follows Weird Weekend. And it's a new issue. I don't know if those of you who've got it, it's within that. And if if you don't like what I said, or you're worried about what I have said, then you can always check on the in the actual article. I will now share the screen. So, yeah, as you can see, I haven't bothered to change that it's Weird Weekend North 2025, but I hope you'll forgive me for that. The question of where is Goblin Hill? I was going to start this at Weird Weekend and offer a chocolate bar for the first person who could guess it, completely forgetting that the previous issue of Fortean Times always says what's in the next issue, where it said Ghosts of Goblin Hill, Haunted Shugborough Hall. So I saved on a bar of chocolate there, but this is the name that it comes from. It's made of two Old English words. Is it skooka or skooka? I don't know, meaning goblin or demon, and burr, which means hill or ancient earthwork. So if you think of Black Shuck and places like Edinburgh and Middlesbrough, then that's how you end up with Goblin Hill, which I thought when I was writing the article sounded a bit more exciting than just Shugborough Hall. And this is a picture of it. I don't know if many of you have been to it, but it's National Trust, and it's definitely worth a visit. So where is it geographically? It's located in Milford, 6 miles east of Stafford on the A513. Originally, there was a moated medieval palace belonging to the bishops of Lichfield. William Anson, a successful lawyer, bought it in 1624 and adapted the palace ruins to create a new manor house, which was subsequently demolished in 1693 by his grandson and replaced with a 3-story country house that forms the core of the current building. The estates were extended by Admiral George Anson, with money from his capturing a Spanish ship laden with £400,000 at that time, so what that would be millions now, of treasure in the 1740s, whilst he was circumnavigating the world. He died hairless, which doesn't mean that he was bald. His brother Thomas inherited and introduced Roman and Greek style to the house interiors. Outside, there were classical monuments built in the ground, such as a Doric temple, Temple of the Winds, Dark Lantern, Shepherd's Monument, Chinese House, and Hadrian's Arch. However, his descendant, the first Earl of Lichfield, lost most of the family fortune by living a profligate lifestyle with excessive gambling and lavish entertainment, so that in 1842, all the contents of the mansion were sold at auction. His descendants later refilled the family coffers, but the estate went to the National Trust upon the death of the 14th Earl. Nevertheless, arrangements were made for Shugborough to continue as the home of the Earls of Lichfield, with Patrick Lichfield, the 5th Earl, living there in a retained wing with its own entrance until he passed away in 2005. Since then, the whole of the estate is with the National Trust. Maybe it's pure coincidence that someone who knew and wrote a lot about goblins and elves, dwarves and hobbits lived in Great Haywood, which is just to the east of the Shugborough Estate. As a student at Oxford, Tolkien read English language and literature. As a reader in English language at the University of Leeds, he produced a Middle English vocabulary and a definitive edition of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. At Oxford University, he was the Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon, with a fellowship at Pembroke College, where he completed his unpublished translation of Beowulf. So it is reasonable to assume that he would have picked up on Shugborough, meaning Goblin Hill. As a soldier with the Lancashire Fusiliers, in World War I, Tolkien was stationed in various parts of Staffordshire, including the Brockton camp of Cannock Chase. Following their marriage in early 1916, his wife Edith moved to Great Haywood to be close to him. Tolkien returned to Great Haywood to recuperate from trench fever contracted in the Battle of the Somme. It was at Rock Cottage on Main Road that he wrote The Cottage of Lost Play and The Fall of Gondolin, which were the first two stories of the Book of Lost Tales, a forerunner of the Silmarillion, and he undoubtedly used the topography of the local landscape to inform his developing mythical world. Tolkien's son Christopher said that the village of Tavrobel is based on Great Haywood. The confluence of the rivers Sow and Trent became where the rivers Gruer and Aphros of Middle Earth meet. The Essex Bridge was referred to as the Grey Bridge of Tavrobel in a related ballad. The House of 100 Chimneys is the ancient house of Gilgannon, one of the oldest elves on Tol Eressëa in Tavrobel, and it is believed to be based on Shugborough Hall itself, which actually has 80 chimneys. As a place where lore and memories were preserved, Tavrobel can be seen as a precursor in Tolkien's imagination for Rivendell, the House of Elrond. A protagonist in the Books of Lost Tales is Gilgannon, who is an elf rather than a goblin, but it's reasonable to see that an elf would be a good character, whereas a goblin would always be perceived as a bad character. But might it be that Tolkien was aware that Shugborough could mean Goblin Hill? Immediately opposite Rock Cottage is an area of land known as the Cliffs, which is now used for grazing animals and has a wall running alongside it. Views from the cliffs look over the Shugborough Estate with Cannock Chase in the background, so it could well have inspired Middle Earth. There are two groups of trees laid out in a circle, with thicket growing underneath their branches and in between their gnarled roots, which make them appear quite short and stumpy. You would have to be about 3 foot high, or a hobbit, to walk underneath them, apparently. There are large mounds and many big old oak trees and horse chestnuts. There is a small cliff quarry where sandstone was mined to build the local convent. It has a 30-foot high cliff and some small caves. It's easy to imagine Tolkien wandering the pathways across the cliffs to build up his strength and absorb the surrounding features and vistas. Or am I talking rubbish? Apologies. I'm now going to give you a flavour of some of the localities that I've just referred to. This is Rock Cottage, and if you look in the middle of the door, it's actually got etchings on the window, which highlighted it's Rock Cottage, and I presume that the words underneath are something to do with Tolkien. Next, I've got a couple of pictures of the cliffs. So as you can see, it's hilly and lots of trees. That's a nice view. I presume it's the sunset rather than the sunrise. But it's a very nice area. This is a larger circle of the stumpy trees. And here is the dragon tree. Now you can rather imagine that being an inspiration for an ent, or something similar. It is a pretty weird looking tree. And here is the confluence of the rivers Sow and Trent, which the bridge in the front of you is actually the Essex Bridge, this is a far better view of the Essex Bridge, which is a very interesting design, as you can well imagine. This is a picture of the caves. And this is a view of Shugborough. I couldn't get a proper photograph, but this is a painting of Shugborough and its part from the east, which is where Great Haywood is from. And as you can see, this some people have argued that it's an inspiration for Middle Earth. I should add that some people suspect that Dudley is the inspiration for Mordor, but that's just probably a vile accusation. Now, these are all photographs of cottages which were built in 1810 to house many of the people who'd lived in the village on the Shugborough Estate. At Weird Weekend, I say, can you guess the name? This was for a bar of chocolate, as I mentioned at the beginning. Obviously, I'm not going to expect you all to shout out, but actually the name of the building, which had, as I say, joined cottages, doors opening onto an inner courtyard, communal oven in the centre, and some of the buildings were used as a school. The name of the building is The Ring. Today, the building has long been demolished, but there's modern houses still built there, but the name is retained, as you can see, as being The Ring. So maybe that's what actually inspired him to write his most famous book. Okay, now some of you might be saying, stop being a tour guide and give us some ghosts. So I will. The Ghosts of Goblin Hill, some witness testimonies. And the first one, this is Patrick Litchfield, as you see, being of the upper classes, it's Thomas Patrick John Anson, 5th Earl of Litchfield, who died unfortunately in 2005. He's better known as Patrick Litchfield, celebrated photographer, cousin of Queen Elizabeth II. And his apartments at Shugborough now houses an exhibition of his work, together with recreation in the studio. My very good friend David Adams knew Patrick through business. They got on very well. He told me about one evening when he was with Patrick at Shugborough, chatting over a glass or two, or however many of whiskey. Inevitably, the subject of ghosts arose. He says that Patrick told him that his original bedroom in Shugborough had 2 doors, and that often he would hear footsteps approaching along the corridor, and then one door would open. The steps would continue across the room to the other door, when that door would open as well. Patrick wasn't disturbed or frightened by this phenomenon and just considered it to be part of normal life. He added that most royal residences had ghosts and that the family just treated them as part of the history of the buildings. Perhaps Lady Harriet. There are supposed to be 3 ghosts that haunt Shugborough. Lady Harriet died in childbirth in the state bedroom, and her ghost is supposed to haunt this room. A former housekeeper is said to haunt the kitchens, with staff having heard the rustle of her skirts and seen her figure pass by windows. And finally, Admiral Anson himself passes through the building, slamming doors. I don't have witnesses for the last two, unless Patrick Litchfield heard slam doors with the footsteps, but David can't remember. In the spring or summer of 1987, or it might have been 88, a lady was with her husband in Lady Harriet's bedroom. It was towards lunchtime, and the room was full of primary school children on a visit. A very uncomfortable feeling of dread came over her, and she couldn't wait to leave the room. It was as if someone or something hateful didn't want her in the room. Her husband didn't sense anything. However, when she went back a while later, after the children had left, she was fine. This puzzled her because she'd been in the room many times before with no problems. She only later found out that Lady Harriet had died in childbirth in that room. And she wonders if whoever or whatever she felt was there, that she felt was there, didn't want the children around, rather than the sensations being directed at her alone. Perhaps the housekeeper. During the 1980s, a lady working at Shugborough Hall, she loved it and always felt safe, even at night events, which involved walking from the cafe to the house in the dark. It was at one event that she was taking items to the house using the cellar, which was just a long corridor with items stored. She'd been backwards and forwards quite a few times with no trouble at all. When, coming down the steps from the house into the cellar, she felt that someone was following her. When she was halfway along the cellar, the feeling left her and she looked behind, but there was no one there. She mentioned her experience to a colleague, who told her that halfway along the cellar there used to be a turning away to the right, evidenced by the brickwork suggesting that there had been a door there in the past, which would have led to either another room or corridor. She never had the same thing happen to her again, but she's convinced that someone or something had followed her. Perhaps it was the ghost of a maid, or possibly even that of the legendary housekeeper said to haunt the hall. She added that there is a cold spot in Swallow Passage, which is between two downstairs rooms. The Man in the Breeches. One lovely, mild, sunny Monday afternoon, sometime in early September 2020, so we're talking about fairly recent, around 4:30, 5 o'clock, Eve was walking alone on the bridle path when she saw a man in his late 60s wearing breeches that came to his knees, dark shoes, a dark jacket and a hat. The man, who was around 5'6" in height, clean shaven with short hair or short fair hair or grey hair, politely said hello to her as he passed. Eve thought that he seemed a bit of a character and chuckled to herself as she thought that he should be on a punt in Cambridge or somewhere. She thought no more of it until she stopped a few paces later to look at some cows. She looked back and realised that the man had completely disappeared. Yet there was nowhere he could have gone, other than through the main gate, but this was locked. She looked all around, but she couldn't see him anywhere. One warm and sunny weekday in June 2016, a couple went for a nice, quiet lunchtime walk, which took them across Essex Bridge towards Shugborough Hall. They stopped just over halfway to admire the river. The view from above in the middle shows you where the Essex Bridge is, and this is where I'll talk about the gates. They stopped just over halfway to admire the river, but as they approached the last quarter of the bridge, they noticed two ladies walking towards the entrance gates from the long bridle path, which cuts through the middle of the estate. One looked between 60 and 70 years of age and had blonde, permed bobbed hair. She was wearing a black cardigan with a black pleated skirt, which came halfway down her lower legs, and black loafer-style shoes. The other was middle-aged with brown, tied-back long hair. She was also dressed all in black, wearing a long-sleeved top, long black straight trousers, and similar-style black shoes. They proceeded to walk into the gates, which are next to the lodge keeper's cottage, and only half a minute from where the married couple were standing. But when they themselves went to walk through the gates, they noticed that they were shut. Indeed, the gates were actually padlocked. They looked at each other in confusion and asked how the two women could have managed to get through the gates. They immediately looked into the wooded area opposite the Shugborough grounds and into the grounds through the gates, as these are different paths. But there was no sign of either of the two ladies. Totally confused, they carried on up the bridle path, frequently looking behind to see if there was any sign of the two ladies, but to no avail. It was as if the ladies had walked to the gates and then vanished into thin air. As I say, the diagram shows you all very close and very strange circumstances. The couple tried to rationalize the incident, but the ladies could not have climbed over the gates as there was insufficient time to do so and then disappear out of sight. Furthermore, the elderly lady didn't look like she would be capable of climbing. The ladies would also not have been able to go back down the bridle path as that was all too open. And they didn't walk across the Essex Bridge or go down to the riverbank because they would have been clearly seen. Nothing similar has happened to the couple since the incident, but to this day, they have no explanation for what they've witnessed. The men on the towpath. One summer in the mid-2000s, a different couple were walking along the towpath on the western side of the canal, on their way towards Shugborough from Colwich Church. It was around midday and they were walking the next door neighbour's dog because the neighbour was recovering from an operation. As they approached Little Haywood Bridge on Meadow Lane, which is the bridge that you see in the picture, they saw some strangely dressed people crossing the bridge, and by the time that they walked under the bridge, the group were ahead of them on the towpath. The leading man was dressed in a hat and long coat, clothes that looked almost Jewish in style, yet he was chanting Hail Marys, with the 3 or 4 other men joining in. Given the pleasant weather, the couple thought it curious that all of the men were very heavily dressed. They wondered out loud whether the men had all been to a funeral. Intriguingly, as they overtook the group, none of the men reacted to their presence. And when they reached the bend in the towpath, they couldn't resist looking back at the group of men. But they weren't anywhere to be seen. This seemed impossible because the men would have had to have run quite fast to have gone back to the bridge and disappeared from view in what was a very short amount of time. Why would they turn and run back to the bridge anyway? Also, there was nowhere for them to have gone either side of the towpath. The couple described this puzzling event to several people over the years, but always received a sceptical reaction. But they know what happened and cannot explain it, making them wonder if what they'd seen was some sort of ghost. Right. Can't go without mentioning Emily. Is this a real photograph of a ghost? I presented it at Weird Weekend North in 2023 in my Bride on the Bridge and the Bride Under the Bridge presentation. Unsurprisingly, the veracity of this photograph was hotly debated in the audience, with arguments for and against. As Danny would say, team believer versus team skeptic. I don't necessarily want to repeat that whole debate. The stories included more for completeness given the location. Karen, pseudonym, acted as the go-between for me with Steve, another pseudonym, whose story is as follows. On the afternoon of Sunday, the 29th July 2012, Steve had been to the Great Haywood village shop and was walking through the woods with his dog Tilly, heading towards the canal where the narrow boats are moored. Passing underneath the railway bridge, just before the iron bridge over the Trent and Mersey Canal, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. He turned around to see who it was, thinking it was someone else out walking, but no one was there. Indeed, there was no one around at all. Nevertheless, Steve felt that someone was there in front of him and he was being watched. He'd had many experiences like this before where he sensed a presence. So, using his mobile phone, he decided to take a photograph of the area by the wall of the railway bridge where he sensed someone to be. When he got home, he looked at the photo and was shocked to clearly see the image of a young woman in front of the wall. She was looking directly at him, and he considered that she looked startled, even though the image was quite transparent. She appeared to be wearing a veil around her head and carrying a small posy of flowers. He thought she looked about 23 years old, although she could have been younger. He named her Emily, as that is the name that came to him when he saw her. Steve showed the photo to Karen, hoping that she might shed some light as to who this woman might be. She speculated a link to a young woman killed in a fatal road traffic accident that happened at the local mill pond in 1905, where a car had come off the road into the pond. Her body was recovered downstream 3 weeks afterwards, not very far from the path leading to the railway tunnel. Interestingly, Tilly the dog didn't react at the time of the incident, as some dogs can do when there is something paranormal going on. Karen shared Steve's photograph with the local Facebook group. An elderly gentleman who'd lived in the village all his life said he recognised this young woman and had often seen her crossing over the nearby Essex Bridge towards Shugborough Hall in the evenings when he was out walking the dog. She's passed him and then simply vanished. Was it a hoax? I asked Karen to double check with Steve that he hadn't been pulling her leg, but he was adamant that it was genuine. Steve lives on a boat and doesn't have electricity, let alone a desktop or laptop computer. He only has a mobile phone, and therefore he doesn't have the wherewithal to superimpose images onto other images. Steve has an Asperger's syndrome and is one of the most honest and innocent people that Karen knows. And after all, the photo was taken nearly 9 years before. Steve has shared the photo only with other local people, and he and Karen would never have given me the story if they knew they would be interrogated about its authenticity later. I must stress that I believe in both Steve's and Karen's sincerity. Neither sought publicity or gain from the photograph, and I only stumbled across it through a chain of events and contacts. The fact that the elderly gentleman, A, recognised the woman from the photograph, and B, indicated that he'd regularly seen her on the Essex Bridge, simply adds grist to the mill. Perhaps Steve somehow inadvertently projected the image onto the photograph, like Ted Sirius allegedly could do. Question: if skeptics do not believe in ghosts, then exactly what would a photograph of a genuine ghost look like if they don't exist anyway? I'll leave it there. Strange sounds of school children. This testimony comes from a lovely lady who's helped me with other research and whom I have great faith in. It will be noted from the map, as you can see, at the top bit you can see Shugborough Hall and the Essex Bridge. And if you go down to the bottom where there's a red circle, I've put that into to highlight where this event took place. The area that is involved is called Haywood's Warren on Cannock Chase. And since, as we know, since the 1970s, Cannock Chase has become infamous for reported sightings of UFOs, wild big cats, werewolves, Bigfoot, ghosts, and even black-eyed children. In March's 2025 issue of Fortune Times, a skeptical Alan Murdy questioned the amount of myth-making that was involved. I don't know about dogmen, but the chase certainly has a lot of dogging. Mary and her son, James, the pseudonyms, have visited the chase for over 25 years and know it very well. Mary has always been interested in history, and one of the locations that she would regularly visit was Brindley Heath on the chase. This includes the site of Brindley Village and the military hospital during the First World War. In 2014, Mary read newspaper articles about black-eyed children on the chase and recognised the location shown in the photograph in one of them. 2 years later, on a very mild September day, Mary and James decided to check out the area for themselves. Having parked up, they walked towards the area concerned. Both felt quite uncomfortable and Both felt quite comfortable and relaxed as they made their way along a path through the trees to a clearing. Mary took some photographs. When they reached a track running along the edge of a small wooded area, they were feeling quite hot and began to slow down. It was then that they heard the chatter and laughter of children and assumed that there was a small party of school children nearby. So they decided to take a short relaxing break and let them pass. They felt cooler as they sat back under the trees to eat their snack bars. Steadily, the giggling and the chattering got louder and louder as if it was coming towards them, but then silence. Mary and James thought this odd, so they got up, looked around and searched the area. Nothing and no one could be found. At this point, they began to feel uneasy, and a cold chill seemed to come over them. They turned and quickly backtracked their way through the trees towards the main road. At the end of the track, Mary stopped and retook a photograph of the same scene she had captured earlier, but now it looked dark, cold and sinister, so she hurried away. James usually waited for Mary whenever she took photographs on their various walks, but on this occasion, he'd gone on ahead of her, keen to escape the sight. Mary believes that because of his autism, James's senses are much more heightened than hers, and she could see that he was ashen-faced and sweating. He said that he felt very troubled. They hastened along the paths and roadways towards the car park, and each vowed never to walk anywhere near the location again, and they never have. What are we to make of Mary and James's encounter? It is certainly strange and frightening. When Mary checked my draft about what had happened to them, she commented that reading it made her feel cold all over again. Clearly, the event had stayed with them ever since. Were black-eyed children involved? Obviously, this cannot be said because the small school party, or whatever it was only heard and was never seen. However, for their sound to get so loud and so near without their being visible points to something paranormal in nature. Mary's two photographs of the track before and after the event are on screen. So the left is the one that was taken initially, and to the right is the one that was taken after the encounter with the noises of the school children. The latter understandably looks sinister, but the scene is probably made darker because of shadows resulting from the sun's direction. However, it is important to remember that the two photographs were taken only a short time apart. My sincere thanks to Karen, who was my main source for witnesses, ghost stories and many of the photographs. The experiences described embrace both Shugborough Hall and the surrounding area. None of those reported inside the hall actually involved the sighting of anything specific. Phenomena were heard or sensed. By contrast, those in the adjacent area all involved apparently real people who simply suddenly disappeared to the consternation of the witnesses. Indeed, in 2 cases, these real people actually spoke or chanted. Such phenomena seem to have more in common with time slips rather than what might be considered traditional ghosts. But then, how would anyone necessarily be able to distinguish one from the other? Instead of Goblin Hill, the name Shugborough could be translated as hill or mound haunted by an evil spirit. The National Trust has confirmed that historically there was a Shugborough village and that there has been evidence of Bronze Age occupation, with the possibility that there was a barrow or fortification in this period. It is worth noting that within the hall's boundaries sits the Shugborough yew tree, reputedly England's largest, and yew trees have long mythological and folkloric reputations. But irrespective of whether Shugborough was viewed as a location haunted by goblins and demons in ancient times, there is no denying that the area around the hall was an inspiration for arguably the greatest writer of fantasy fiction and something of a locus for strange phenomena here in the 21st century. Thank you. Q&A.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rob. That's a very, very interesting story. Can I ask if you could possibly stop screen sharing so we can see your lovely face on the screen while I'm talking to you, please?
Hang on. The question is the figure that's in front of you better looking than me? No, maybe not. I don't know.
We can actually do a poll on that one if you want, for me to work out if the poll's working. So I can guess what the answers are going to be. But thank you. Brilliant. I love folklore stories that's told. It's so interesting to hear how the local areas focus their attentions on certain aspects within folklore itself. But Rob,
I'm from Staffordshire myself, from the right end. But I wasn't aware of the history around Tolkien and Great Haywood until when I was doing this research.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Somebody who did write in the Q&As did mention that they knew about it. So it'll be interesting later when Christian goes through. Rob, me for one, I don't really know much about you. So let's do a little bit of a Q&A to find out more about you, because you are a published writer that everybody knows, and you have so many articles, huge amount of articles that's been shared within 14 times and areas like that. How many articles do you actually write a month?
Oh, I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. Some of them are long, some of them are short. I guess it would probably be at least one a month, maybe certainly one every 2 months.
Yeah.
The nature of research is that, I mean, sometimes I'll just pick up on something short and sharp, maybe humorous, like try to do a link between King Richard III and his enabling Leicester City to win the Premier League, which is a true fact, honestly. I mean, so sometimes what I write are not necessarily as serious as others. I mean, I've only really been writing articles in any volume really in the last 10 years or so, when retirement enables you to do things that you always wanted to do. But it was just happenstance. And I did some research. I think I presented on the the old man of House of Moss on here many, many moons ago, which I came across the case by pure accident because I was just talking about a book about urban legends, and my friend, colleague at work said, "Oh, well, that happened to me, that Phantom Hitchhiker." And really? Oh. And so I decided to write it up because I think if you don't write these things up, then they disappear into the ether. And he was agreeable, providing that I anonymise his name. And that was published way, way back. And then I realised, I'm going back to about 2014, 15, I realised that it was coming up to the 50th anniversary or something like that of his actual event. And I thought, oh, I wonder how you would manage to see if there were more cases across House of Moss. Well, you can't go knocking on people's doors and saying, "Excuse me, but have you had a strange experience?" Well, you could, but you'd end up being arrested. So I did a piece in the local freebie newspaper saying, has anybody had, without putting too much detail in, has anybody has similar sorts of experiences? And I thought if I got one or two, that'd be great. I got 8, and I ended up doing a presentation to raise money for the local hospice because I used to be end of life lead, commissioning lead, acting for Liverpool PCT for about 18 months, and having been involved with cancer services, I've got a great affinity for hospices and the work that they do. And so I did it for the local hospice to talk about, because it's the local patch. And I was flabbergasted because there were about half a dozen people queuing up at the end to tell me their stories. And I was like, wow. I mean, one case was who got in touch with me before the event. He'd sat on his story for about, 40 years. But then he saw that, here was someone talking about these things. And it's rolled from there. It's like you then write them into an article, and then it's like feeds off each other. I note that if you do your call for witnesses, it stays on the internet forever. And therefore, like somebody who contacted me from Stockport was, because of her ghostly experiences, Googled about ghosts in Stockport and came across my call about the Phantom Black Rider of Mersey Square in Stockport. And so she contacted me. And that's led to probably the most disturbing case that I've ever read or researched. And there's 3 articles based on that, which haven't been published yet. They're sitting in the pile, sitting in Fortune Times. David Sutton's got his Gandy pile, you see. But yeah, it's my hobby, and I've got a very lovely and patient wife.
I know where you're coming from, obviously, being a writer as well. So for me, when somebody suggested it, yes, of course you can.
No, sorry, no. Did what I just tell you answer your question?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to lead into some other questions that I've got for tags as well off of that one. But so yeah, I mean, when you first start writing, were you like me, where somebody suggests, oh, you've got a talent for writing, I suggest you go and do it, and you go, what am I going to write about? What have I got to say that people want to hear? And then you sit there and you think, God, and you come up with your first article. And then afterwards, there's no shutting you up, is there really? That's how I feel. I go, I'm going to write into that one next, and I'm going to write that one.
Yeah.
But how do you decide? How do you decide what you're going to research? What is it that gives you that interest to go and delve and to dig?
Happenstance. I mean, I seem to run into stories. I sometimes get contacted by people. I bump into people, and what I find is that if people are aware of me, then I think they see me as an opportunity to unburden their story. I'm a great believer that there are thousands, millions of stories out there of genuine experiences which have happened to people, which might not necessarily be paranormal, but to them it's strange. But they've only ever shared it with close family and friends, and they don't want to share it beyond that for fear of ridicule. And that's the barrier. And
Do
I
you
always
find
have,
that because you're a legitimate writer that you don't fancy stuff up,
I
that they're more approachable?
I would not deny for one moment that the advantage that I have or have had is that I'm able to call myself Dr. Rob Gandy, even though I'm not a medic, and also being able to put that I was a visiting professor. It gives I'm
Credibility.
not sure if authenticity is the right word, but it means that if people contact me, then they think I will treat them seriously and sympathetically. Whereas if I was Joe Bloggs, paranormal, researcher, it's like, can I come and listen to your story? You probably wouldn't get very far. So yeah, it is an advantage, but that wasn't by design to become. And one thing on when you contact newspapers and you say, "Oh, would you mind?" And people, you cannot guarantee what they will write. These journalists,
Mm.
and the number of times I get described as paranormal expert or something, I'm not. I'm not sure who is, but I see myself as a classic fortune. I try and find information and analyze it as best I can. Look for, is there a mundane explanation or whatever? Often there isn't. But if you don't collect the evidence and publish the evidence, then you'll never get to see if there are any patterns. And as a statist, I'm a professional statistician, and I just like patterns. So that's my excuse. Bearing in mind, if I was sad that my main focus has always been road ghosts, and most road ghost episodes last no more than 5 or 10 seconds. So, in a way, you've got to just collect all of them and try and see if there are general patterns. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, please don't shut up. That's what we've asked you here for, to hear your story. But yeah, I had the same conversation with a friend of mine this week who said how important it is to actually get the history noted and to get it down, because you could be the only person that has that information, and if you pass, there is no chance that that's ever going to be left in the annals of history. So writing it and recording it and logging it is incredibly important as a researcher and a writer. So I 100% understand that. But is there any chance that you're going to put all these stories together in a book, Rob?
Hopefully. There is a tone. Oh, my brain's gone. Tony Peake. Got a good relationship with Tony, and he's well, he lived about 200, no, not 200 yards, a quarter of a mile away from me, and we never met. And it was only, I think, through his webinar with ASSAP that somehow I think I recognised his accent, and somehow we got in touch, and we realised that we used to share the same pub, and it was. But there you go. He now lives down south somewhere, and he's made suggestions to a publisher, and I've provided details and an outline, and they are interested, but they've got a lot of things on their plate at the moment, and I'm waiting to hear further. But publishers move in mysterious and slow ways.
They do. And if you actually need anybody else, then let me know, because I have a publisher who would be really interested in publishing your books.
Oh,
So
right.
for me, if you are up and together and you've got a book, can you put me down for a signed autographed one, please? Because I will definitely be first in the queue. But Rob, from me, thank you so much again. I'm going to hand over to the lovely Christian to ask the questions now. Thank you.
Captain America, come on.
That's America indeed, but I've got longer hair than more Bucky Barnes, I guess. Oh, dude, so thank you very much for joining us here today. It has actually been wonderful to listen to your stories and anecdotes and collections, as always the case. But we have an ask of you. We ask that you hit the like button here. We ask that you hit the subscribe button. And the reason is, for you it is just a moment, but for us it really helps the algorithm find our content and other people find what really is deeply interesting to them.